packet pushers.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Packet Protector, where cybersecurity and networking meet. And we are at the RSA Conference. I'm here with Drew Conry-Murray, and we have a special guest here with us today because we have all kinds of questions around threat hunting. And so we grabbed Jamie from MITRE, because who better to talk about threat hunting?
We should probably get this out of the way up front. How do we feel about the word thrunting? It might slip out of my mouth, so I just want to warn you in advance.
I'm glad you warned us ahead of time. If you have little kids in the car and you don't want them to hear thrunting, this is your time to skip.
Yeah.
But I'm okay with thrunting.
I felt like I wasn't okay with it. The more I hear it now,
It's shocking at first.
It is
It's
shocking
definitely
at
shocking
first,
at
yes.
first.
It takes a little bit to digest. Like you
Yeah.
said, there's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And there's an unlearning curve, which is kind of where, full disclaimer, but I'll try to keep it PG.
As long as we're talking about thrunting in the context of cybersecurity, I think we're okay. We
Yeah.
can keep our PG rating.
Okay.
so let's talk about threat hunting, because we hear this term from all the marketing vendors. We hear the term from all of the different managed security and MDR. What is threat hunting?
Not quite a hot take, but the way I think about threat hunting, the way I explain it to a lot of folks is it's what detection engineering couldn't do. You're building analytics, you're building alerts, and those are meant to be stable, productized. Threat hunting is that R&D tip of, hey, I have an idea, or I see a behavior, or I have some kind of catalyst. How do I translate this concept of detecting something into something that I can kind of deliver and push over to the SOC and response and IR, those folks? That's not to necessarily diminish any other things that's happening in the threatening space, but it's the goalpost that I like to establish of, okay, when we're threat hunting, look at what we're doing in terms of detection coverage and things we already have in place. What can we do next? Let's play around with ideas. Let's go experiment. What do these logs look like? What does this adversary behavior look like in these logs? And how can I iteratively play with that, learn, experiment, grow, and then eventually hand that back to, wow, that's a really cool detection. Or this is a nightmare. We're never going to detect this. Now we have a regular hunt. And I think that kind of procedural flow ends up making a lot more sense than I think a lot of people get stuck in that rut of, I'm going to go, I almost said it again, threat hunt. I didn't find anything. Did I win? Am I doing good? And you're like, well, what's the tangible outcome here?
So the process of threat hunting, because I've heard a lot of, automated threat hunting, which to me sounds like that can't possibly be a tool set, because it's more of a human using a tool set or a group of tools maybe together. So what does it look like when someone's threat hunting? What do you do functionally? What are you doing?
You're looking, you're poking, you're prodding. And I think to your point about tools, I love that mentality of a tool is a tool. It's an enabler or a scaler for a process. It doesn't replace the process. So exactly to your point, I think when you're poking and you're looking in logs and you're kind of experimenting and you're failing and you're what is, I'm looking for this slick new lateral movement or this new persistence. I'm digging through logs and figuring out the feasibility of it. Automation comes to play of, okay, I realize it's a lot easier to grab logs at scale with, particular tools. Or, hey, to my earlier point, this is a nightmare. We're never going to be able to detect this at scale. So I've built enough of a query and enough of a net to go look for this. I can set and forget this and say, run this query every 2 weeks. That's my automated hunt. And, send me an email, light a flag up, whatever it may be, if you find anything. And unfortunately, until, technology catches up or something else changes, that's the best we're going to do.
Okay, that's interesting, because I sort of assumed threat hunting was sort of just one-off adventures into all of my logs and all the information out there to see if something's going on. But you're saying you can take what you've learned from a particular thrunt and build processes around it?
Yeah, it's getting traction here. Yeah, I love it.
We introduced it. We got to use it.
I think you're spot on, and I think that venture into the forest without structure is where people get lost. So you're doing that adventure, you're going off, but you need some kind of systemic guardrails to make sure what you're doing is additive. Because the last thing you want to do is, hey, we threat hunt every Friday, we didn't find anything, and then next Friday you're doing the exact same thing, and you're like, well, actually, disclaimer, big shout out to Andy, never hunt on Friday. You don't want to find anything on Friday. So when you're hunting on Monday, with a full week ahead of you, you're caffeinated, everyone's well rested.
That's a professional tip right there.
Yeah, not quite a hot take. But you need to make sure that it's iterative. The process is always going to be iterative, but it needs to be additive. We can't just be doing the same thing and calling it success. We need to be, what did I look for? Why did I look for that? How did I look for it? And then what did I learn? And what am I going to do better next Monday?
And is threat hunting then sort of a regular part of my security process, or is it triggered by, there's some anomaly out there, I don't quite know what it is, so I need to threat hunt to investigate, or is it something that should be done regularly?
You're going to hate this answer, yes. So a little bit of both, and I think that's where you start to build out that cadence of, we have projects that we're working on, of, hey, I'm worried about our network infrastructure. The logs aren't great. So in the back when, like, hey, maybe every Monday afternoon we do network infrastructure. Every Tuesday we do this, every Wednesday we do this. But also when poo hits the fan, oh crap, that's a new TTP I haven't heard. Or maybe an executive came in and said, we're worried about this. Or I'm at RSA Conference and I saw, oh, well, that's a slick new technology. I didn't realize that was an option. Those are those catalysts for, okay, maybe I need to carve out some extra time on Monday, or this takes priority. So it's a little bit of a juggling thing, but again, I think this is fundamentally, especially we are in this thrunt mentality, documentation, unfortunately, is key.
You just took all the fun out of threat hunting.
Yeah, no. Well, I didn't say the word Jira, but Jira is a great tool for a threat hunting team.
Thou must write to thrunt.
Print it. Stickers coming next week.
So are there some examples, without being too specific, of things you've seen or found, or other people have seen or found in their environments through this process? What types of things were you seeing?
So the beauty of this process is you get to see what reality actually looks like. I think we very often talk about, like lateral movement, initial access, and phishing, and all these concepts. But like, what does that look like in your logs? And like, it's going to be incomplete. And that's the beauty of detection engineering, is you're not just going to like find phishing, or you're not going to find like, lateral movement. You're like, oh, well, there's a little bit of data here, there's a little bit of data here. Like, I can kind of see, like, login events here, network connections from over here. And if I correlate it and quaffed it ever so slightly, I might be able to kind of tell a really good story. And I think that's the beauty of hunting, is it looks so different in every environment, in every network, with every tech stack, even at every host. You might have completely different censoring. So you just kind of have to figure out, like, what is our reality and how can I make the most out of what we have? But also start to, back to documentation, start to build a path for a better tomorrow of, hey, business is telling us we need to be, so proficient at detecting this. The reality is we don't have the logs, we don't have the tech stack, we don't have the time. Now I can start to build a business justification for, I need additional money or staff or training or whatever, because this is, big business justification, big business like project. The reality does not look as great. So put up or shut up.
With all of those different pieces and logs and looking at things, I assume that's across different assets, protect surfaces, network, endpoint, whatever. What knowledge, skill set, expertise do threat hunters or thrunters have coming into the environment? What's that breadth look like?
Creativity, I would say. And the way I always like to think about, and across a lot of different disciplines, is you kind of almost have to like see it in your head and be able to kind of almost tabletop of like, hey, I'm going to keep piggybacking on that lateral movement example of, hey, we're going to Monday afternoon go hunt and figure out how to better detect and find malicious lateral movement. Like, you're not going to go dive into, your seam of choice and just start like hitting keys and like, oh, I'm going to find it. I think you need to like, almost model it in your head of like, okay, cool. Like, what does the offensive side look like? Okay, an adversary had access to something and they moved across. Well, there's a login, there's a network connection, there's probably activity on both sides. They might move a file. Okay, now I need it's kind of almost purple teaming here. Like, what does that look like in terms of logs? Ideally, as well as the reality of maybe our tech stack is crap, but how do I make the most of that crap? Whatever it may be. So that's where you kind of build out that feasibility. Before I even hit a keyboard, like, what does success look like? What am I actually looking for? To your point about the forest, like, I don't have a perfect map, but at least I have like a couple steps and I know I can kind of map as I go and figure out, like, do I need to turn left, right, or turn around? Like, this is a terrible idea. Throw it in the bottom of the Jira and like we'll rinse and repeat with something a little bit more promising.
And that makes sense, because I'm just thinking about having looked through different logs from different things and different platforms over the years. And even when you're intimate with that platform, scrubbing through the logs is just a sea of crap. You can't just look through logs and be able to derive a lot. But if you kind of know what you're looking for, I'm looking for this type of activity in the logs, that makes a lot more sense to me. Then I assume you just have to have the appropriate level of logging enabled, going to the right source so that you have access to that information.
Right, and I think that's a perfect analogy, is when you're thrunting, you're not looking for a needle in the haystack, you're building out a methodology to find needles.
Okay.
That makes a lot more sense. Could you talk a little bit more about that, what you mean about building out a methodology? Because again, my assumption coming in was I'm looking for the needle in the haystack. But you're talking about building a process to find needles as opposed to looking for a specific needle.
I do not want a single point in time victory, because a lot of times, depending on how you're trying to hunt and what you're trying to hunt, a good success is the hay's fine. There's no needles in there.
Okay.
But more importantly, like, that's not sustainable. Because it's like, okay, cool. Like, that's how you get to every Monday I sift through hay and I didn't find needles. More importantly, it's like, okay, if I figured out how to find needles, why would I keep doing it this way?
Yeah, then it's just roulette. Are you lucky today?
Yeah. Or, like, what has the threat hunting team been doing? Like, not finding stuff. That's great. If you can tell me what you looked for. But, like, like, how did you look? What did you look for? And, like, it's a good confirmation of, like, hey, I think we're fine.
And now I'm understanding the process, because when you come to an executive to say, well, we didn't find anything, they're going to be like, well, okay, so we don't need this.
How much did that cost?
And how much did that cost? So having that, and here's what we did, and here's how we did it, documentation and process seems like it's important to justify not finding anything.
Exactly.
Because, yeah, it's almost like you're proving that thing didn't happen because you looked for that thing.
Yeah.
You weren't just looking for stuff. You weren't
Yeah.
just looking out into the field and seeing what flew across you. You went
Right.
hunting for... That's why it's called threat hunting. Ding. Oh, my God.
So is there sort of like a minimum kind of infrastructure and tooling that you would need to be good at this? Like, do I need a SOC?
Creativity and a willingness to experiment, which is often acceptance of failure. Of, hey, that was a bad idea, or like that didn't work, or like I thought I had a really good idea for a hunt idea, it completely fell flat, but I can pivot on that and learn from it and say, oh, like I was hunting for lateral movement, it was a nightmare because of XYZ, but while I was there, I saw this field or this little, I didn't realize our thing was indexing this data. That's really interesting. How can I translate that back to, I saw a really interesting log, what could this potentially pick up? You know, and I think that's, you get that iterative back and forth, and it's a little bit of kind of cyber tabletop meets purple team meets detection engineer. But I think if you do it, even if it's small, like, hey, I spent an hour a week doing this, it grows, it scales, especially, again, if you're writing it down, you're building a corpus of knowledge that's not going to exist anywhere else, because no one in the world is going to know your network better than what you're creating then and now.
So what goes into the documentation, writing down a process or writing down the results of a threat hunt?
So I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. So what did you look for? Why? Like, give me some business justification of, like, because of this report or executive said so, or, hey, I just think this is a really bad thing that we need to find. And then how did you look for it? And iteratively, like, you know, over time, day one, day two, or whatever, how is that maturing? Is, I think that's where you start to see that productization of, once you've reached a point where you're thrunting and this thing is really mature and it's not finding needles, I think you have an alert. That's really good. Just go plug that into a detection. Never look at this again. Rinse and repeat. So if you're actually looking for a tangible, you know, I don't know if you plug like open source products, but there's a really great project, Threat Hunters Playbook. I said that really fast. Caffeination's catching up. Roberto Rodriguez has like an awesome repository of exactly what I'm talking about. Like, hey, how do we build out a hypothesis? How do we make sure like the prereq data is even available? And then how do I kind of start to translate that to actual like detection logic? It looks like detection logic because it is. That's really, like, again, getting back to my like kind of definition of thrunting, you're really just kind of doing the R&D of detection engineering and hopefully trying to translate that over.
So then my next question would be, at some point you did mention kind of like automated queries and repeating things or building them into detection. Is there a point at which what you've built as a threat hunter gets rolled into one of the tools or products? Or is the benefit of this that it's so tuned for your environment and pulls from sources that you can't correlate in another way?
Another really unfortunate, yes. And I think that's the beauty of it. You kind of reach that place where like, this is going to be really weird. We fronted this as much as we could. This is as mature of detection logic as I think we're going to get. How confident are we in this? And I think that's why the documentation is really important. How many false positives does this hit? Is this going to light up our SOC if we actually deploy it? Or, hey, I can run this on 10,000 hosts to get 0 results. So that's a really good alert. Or, hey, throw it against the red team. Can you go do exactly what we're hunting and make sure we're actually going to catch what we think we're going to catch? And like that's where you start to build out those different like, you know, kind of ways of evaluating it. And then you make that decision of, is this ours? Is this good for the community? Is this so weird and so complex and so costly that we do this, we automate this and do it once a quarter, once a month? But whatever it is, it's still better than nothing. And I think that's where you go to your executive and say, what have you been doing with this threatening program? And like, we're creating bespoke, tailored ideas that exist nowhere else, that not only align with what we're prioritizing, but align with the reality that is our weird, complex network.
Yeah, it's also interesting that you can turn this into a resource, in that we can eventually, if we do this well enough and refine it, turn it into actions we can put into a SIEM or an IDS or some
Yeah.
other mechanism where we can build actual alerts around what we're doing.
And you have the background about it too, because you made it. It's in-house. And you're like, how many times have you seen an alert? And you're like, what? And like, I mean, it sounds bad, like severity 10 out of 10, but like, what's actually happening? How does it work? Versus, again, documentation. You're like, we made this, we baked it, we own it, we're accountable for it, and I can tell you exactly what we should do if you ever see this on our dashboard.
Let's pause for just a moment to tell you about Human Infrastructure and Packet Capture, 2 weekly Packet Pushers newsletters you can subscribe to for free. Human Infrastructure delivers informative technical blogs, links to tech resources and tools, plus IT news stories and new product announcements, all with commentary by the Packet Pushers. There's also Packet Capture, a weekly digest of everything the Packet Pushers have published over the past 7 days, including podcasts, blogs, and YouTube videos. It's an easy way to find the episodes and content you want. Sign up for one or both for free at packetpushers.net/newsletters. We don't sell or share your email address with anyone. It's just between us.
We've mentioned logs quite a bit. Are there other information sources that are useful to a threat hunter?
Really great one is talking to admin, because like you're going to hit a lot of false positives, and especially with threat hunting, a lot of what you're doing is learning what normal looks like. Again, you're enumerating the hay of, okay, I can't find needles if I don't know what the surrounding just kind of noise is. So being able to not only, like, I know security folks, we kind of exist in this bubble and we're like, oh, up here worrying about like cyber war and good versus bad, but then you have to dump that into like, it's almost that war is happening like downtown, like city. And there's just a bunch of people just trying to send emails and write documents. And you're like, okay, how do I like do that chaotic mess still in the context of not getting in the way of everyone else? Because the last thing I want to do is like start to, hey, we hunted this and we have a good idea for control, and now no one can send an email. And I'm like, oh, well, congrats. Like we're all fired.
Resume generating.
Yep.
So can you dig into that a little bit more? What does it mean, go talk to admins?
So when you kind of come with the hypothesis of, okay, cool, like we're worried about lateral movement, this is how I think we're going to detect it. I don't know if this is before or after touching keyboard. That's probably a really interesting decision point there. But go talk to whoever owns those systems of, does this seem silly? Is there anything else that I don't know about? Some of the realizations might be, hey, those logs that you're looking at, we store those for like a day. And you're like, oh, good. I'm glad I didn't waste my time. Like, okay, that just completely shifted the cadence of this hunt, where, running this on a, monthly basis would be an absolute waste of time. Revenue generating for whatever tech side is, good for them, creating a lot of events, but this isn't going to actually go anywhere. Or, oh, wow, like, hey, we're finding these results. Does this make sense to you? You don't need to, like, be a threat hunter, but the admin's going to know the system. They're going to be like, okay, cool, like, that makes sense. Or, oh, by the way, this is how that system's kind of used. So lateral movement, you're going to get a lot of false positives because we're all RDP into that. So you're going to need a little bit more. Or, hey, you're hunting for lateral movement on this system that no one should ever log into. So why don't we just, like, cut all the accounts off of it? Like, you're wasting your time. Like, we can just close this door. Okay. So I think that kind of, again, it's kind of not the tech context. Like, I think there's a lot of tech, like, what's the logs, what's the, all those environmentals. But there's also like that, from the admins, you're looking for that business kind of like, what is this system? What's all it about?
The operational context. What is this thing doing, when and how and why?
And what looks weird to those people? Yeah.
What is the hay?
Is thrunting a team sport? And that, like, do you or do threat hunters usually work with a team, and do you like whiteboard and brainstorm when you're trying to figure out what to go after next?
Ideally, if well funded.
If well funded.
Yeah. It's not like a blocker, because you could have a good thrunting team that's, a single army, but just one hero that's just going to go do stuff, or trading hats of, hey, we're a detection engineering team, or even thinking about it a little bit more nascent, like, we're a tier 1 SOC, we're just doing response, and a good thrunting activity could be, I've seen that alert a million times, it's crap every time we've ever investigated, it's always a false positive, I'm going to go spend the next hour trying to fix it. Like, congratulations, you're hunting. You're refining, you're tuning, you're going to go play with stuff. So, ideally, you have a lot of resources, you have a team with a bunch of different perspectives and backgrounds and all these different, skills, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's a, showstopper or anything.
Would it just be security people on the threat hunting team, or can you pull in networking, DBAs, that kind of thing?
Again, creativity. Yeah. Okay. Any and all perspectives are welcome, because you're going to add something. Some, whether it's business, tech, or just looking at ideas and saying, well, what if we did this? All great perspectives, as long as it doesn't get like, too classic, too many chefs in the kitchen, but a little bit of balance. And I think that's kind of, you have to fill out a team and like what process makes sense. Because you might have some people that are very offensive focused. We're like, hey, we're good at like generating ideas to hunt. And then maybe someone else is good at like prioritizing. Oh, that one doesn't make sense. That one doesn't make sense. And then obviously the business perspective of like, what could we actually like, do? What does the cadence look like? How many resources do we have? And I think all of those kind of combine is just something that kind of, again, is comfortable, sustainable. It isn't just like hey, we did this big threat hunt and then we'll do it again maybe next year, maybe not.
Is there sort of a organizational maturity where threat hunting makes sense, or we're operating in a resource-constrained environment? Is there something else I can give up to do threat hunting, or how do I incorporate threat hunting into everything else I have to do?
Or where does that fit in the line of, pen test, red team, blue team, purple team?
Yeah,
blah, blah,
or how do
blah.
I prioritize it when I've got 100 emergencies?
Right. That's a fun question, and I think it's another, it depends, but I think there is a sequential kind of, maturation model here. It's the same mantra we kind of say in like red teaming is like, it's really not super valuable to red team if you don't have like an idea what your blue team is like. Like, why am I going to come in and just like break stuff if you don't plan on fixing it? Like, it's kind of a waste of everyone's time. Mm-hmm. And I think to your point, like threat hunting is very much of like a what else could we be doing activity. So I think it's really helpful to think about it in that context of make sure, the house isn't on fire and like we got everything under control. And then it's kind of that cherry on top of like looking outward of like what's next. I wouldn't put it before like, actually doing response, remediation, all those, controls, all those things. But you kind of know it when you're like, hey, we're comfortable. We kind of have a cadence. And even if, CVE might come out Friday, whatever, like things might happen. But we're hungry. We're looking for like something else to do, some new innovation. Mm-hmm. And obviously, tech is done when it's done, and we've have all these other options. But like process-wise, procedurally, we're just like empty-handed and a little bit kind of have an appetite for more.
Yeah, not in constant firefighting mode.
Right.
And that actually was my other question, which is how much of an opportunity is there for a third party or a partner to come in and do threat hunting, or is that not really a great idea because you need somebody that's steeped in the environment?
It's a good bootstrap, especially if you're like, hey, like we want to go hunt like on our edge devices, but we don't really have anyone that's good at that. Or like it's going to take a lot of scripting or some kind of like, enablement to get this going. I think that's a good chance, but exactly to your point, like the real value is you're almost thrunting your way into like training of your environment. So the last thing you want is to like completely outsource it and then all that knowledge walks out the door. Yeah. And you're like, oh, wow, like they know a lot about our environment. I hope they like want to come back.
Do people thrunt in OT, ICS, IoT, where there's kind of weird endpoints?
Hopefully. Yeah, I imagine. Like I said, I definitely not something I've had a lot of firsthand like accounts of, but I think it's the same principle of like, hey, like especially where detection is probably a lot more anomaly-based in those environments, it's probably a really good idea. It probably takes a different form, but I think in terms of the approach, the same kind of, well, what are we doing? What could we be doing? And let's just start playing around with things. I would have to talk to like Joe Slovic or an expert in this space, but I imagine a lot of those same principles translate.
Where have you seen thrunting go off the rails? Like where an organization has tried to spin up a program or a professional team or whatever, and then just got a little sideways. What were the causes of that?
So I'm a big fan of the mantra of do less better. Like start small, figure out like what success is and take tiny, tiny steps versus, an easy way to kind of throw yourself into madness would be I'm going to hunt everything. I'm going to look at all of MITRE ATT&CK and hunt every TTP and every variation of every procedure. And then I have, 1,000 open JIRA tickets and no conclusions. So again, I think it's kind of taking, every lesson we've learned in every other discipline, start small, plan, and say, okay, cool, like we might have a lot of ideas. Let's figure out the best and the most, like, whether it's impact or low cost or whatever it is, and let's figure out a, methodology for prioritizing these and kind of seeing each through to its most potential rather than I'm going to look at every potential situation and kind of just do almost effectively nothing.
How do you differentiate threat hunting from pen testing, red, blue, purple teaming, tabletop exercising, etc.?
This isn't quite a hot take. I think it's a lot of spins of the same kind of outcome. We're all looking for the same thing. We're trying to assess and fix. And it's just what skills and what, kind of background you bring to the table. Where a red teamer, a good red teamer is saying, okay, I see the system. What are the most likely ways it could be kind of taken advantage of? And how do I bring that to light and show people what that looks like? Where the threat hunter is kind of doing that same thing, but it's rather than, hacky, it's how do I like imagine what evil looks like from the perspective of logs and sensors. So again, I think it's really healthy to kind of merge all those together. I know purple teaming exists. I think if you mix every color, you get white. Like that could get weird, like white teaming. I guess, whatever, that's not the worst thing I've ever said today. But I think that healthy mentality of kind of like realizing it's one team with a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different processes. So yeah, I love that question, actually. That's phenomenal.
And you teach some threat hunting. So Jamie and I are both faculty with IONS, and so we have some other engagements through that. And you teach some threat hunting there. When you do those classes, like what kind of stuff are you guys? Is it hands-on? What is it?
Hands-on is tough. I've seen really great hands-on like training in the threat hunting space. It's a lot of infrastructure, obviously, like especially for our lab environment. So there are great folks in industry doing that, especially free and publicly available. But we mostly talk about the mindset. And I think that's kind of, especially I'm like, hey, I'm going to empower you to kind of see the problem in the way that I feel is right and kind of, shoo you off to, your own successes.
And I think the creativity thing, so Drew will know this. Several months ago, somebody in the Packet Pushers Network put out a blog that was talking about how like creativity and engineering was overrated and we needed to like stick with the processes and stick with things. It's been burning deep inside of me and I've just been waiting. Yeah. I need to respond to that because I think creativity is the little black dress and the silver bullet that solves so many problems. And I think we're more efficient and effective and we do bigger and better things when we're creative. So I fundamentally disagree with the idea that when you're a technical person, the more deep you are in the mire of technical details, the less creativity you should have. I think it's the opposite.
Deeply co-sign that.
Yeah.
And I think, like, especially when it comes to hiring, staffing teams, it's really hard to teach creativity. I like finding creative people and then teach them engineering. And you're like, oh, cool, like, I can teach you tech stuff. Like, that's easy. Like, your ability to see problems, decompose them, and, like, see them for what they truly are, and, like, oh, cool, like, so just solving puzzles, things like that. I'm a huge fan of that kind of interview process of like, you don't need to know like the internals of Linux or OT and protocol specific like that. As a practitioner, you learn that and you slowly forget it anyway. So it's like, who cares?
But the mindset thing, because so many, when I was growing up as an engineer, like you were praised for knowing everything and being right. And it sounds like if you're going to thrunt, you're not going to know everything. You're going to try to figure it out as you go along and you're going to be wrong a lot. And that's just okay. You've got to think outside the box, go for it, and what happens, and you try again the next day. Yeah.
Engineers like pretend to know everything. And we're just like, oh yeah, I remember that. And like behind the scenes, you're like Googling it or like you got your textbooks from college like flipping through like, oh yeah, RFC, like whatever, yeah.
If people are uncomfortable with the word creativity for whatever reason, is curiosity also a good word?
I think they're hand in hand. And not to get too philosophical here, but I think curiosity is a medium towards creativity of like the best people I work with are the question askers. Like, why is it like that? And you're like, like, what's happening here? Or that thing works. Why is it successful? Or that thing works. Why would someone make that? And that's my favorite thing to do at RSA Con is like, tech stack's cool, but like, what problem hit you in the face? Or do you have a solution or trying to find a problem? But I think asking that question is kind of that muscle memory that builds the engineering. I'm going to tear this thing apart, even if it's already perfect, and just kind of see why it is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think maybe wrapping up, I would love to know, are there resources at MITRE or beyond MITRE that you would recommend people check out?
Ooh. As I already mentioned, the Threat Hunters Playbook, shout out to Roberto Rodriguez, really excellent resource. Couple really great blogs. I wish I just had them offhand, but I will drop them in a Slack or Signal.
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes.
MITRE has a TTP-based hunt methodology paper. It's really interesting. There's like this V of hunting, very classic MITRE. There's a diagram.
We like diagrams.
Yeah, everyone loves a good slide. But yeah, I think the best I can give you is just like, go touch your environment and just like, hey, this system, what does it log? What could happen to this? And what could I potentially do about it? And I think that will open up the doors to what resources you need. Because I think a lot of people like grab something and they're like, how do I make this mine? How do I apply this? Like, go find the problems that you face. Go find your needles in your hay. And then like, okay, now that I see the issues, what tools, what automation, what all these resources could I bring to kind of help me deal with the thing that's in front of me? So a little bit of a different approach.
Is there like a threat hunting sort of starter hunt? We've mentioned lateral movement a lot as kind of an example. Is that?
Yeah, like is there a capture the flag, but for threat hunting to teach you those skills maybe?
There should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, I know you're.
Or is it more like in our organization, our risk profile means I would probably want to look for XYZ, as opposed to I'm going to start with this specific thing.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all. There's probably like a WASP level, esque top 10, but like I'm a big fan of like exactly you said, go look at what you're currently detecting and be creative of like, okay, cool, I see what we're doing. From that list of what we're already doing, are there things that I don't trust? Like, okay, cool, I already have a starting point because like that's crap, that's good. And the crappy ones are like, okay, let's toss them in Jira, let's go fix them. The good ones, your starting pack is, why does that work? Like, how does it work? Okay, this alert, it's solid. Like, let's look at the logic. Let's go decompose. Could it be improved? Or what about this is good? Now we have a template for, okay, everything we're doing with these crappy alerts, let's translate it to this good one. And like fundamentally understand like what makes a good analytic and rinse and repeat.
That's fantastic.
All of the various vulnerabilities we've seen recently in infrastructure. Now, I'm going to throw a bunch out there, but we've had Cisco, we've had Palo, we've had all the Avanti stuff. Like, we've had all of these different things. Were those things found through threat hunting primarily? Is that the type of thing that threat hunting activities are meant to find that regular tooling is not going to pick up?
I think that's a really good question. So I don't know the origin story for a lot of those, but I think that is a really good hunt catalyst of, hey, I saw this CVE. In the meantime, between now and patching, can we understand how that works, what logs it's generated, and even generally, like rather than playing whack-a-mole with CVEs, generally, hey, we have this thing sitting and hanging off our network on the internet. A good hunt would be, let's figure out the best ways to figure out if this thing's ever exploited. What do web shells that look like? What does a pre-auth unauthenticated adversary running commands look like? And like I said, rather than chasing like every Friday a new CVE, can I fundamentally kind of cast a wider net and say I'm just going to detect and figure out how to thrunt broad abuse? I mean, that's a really hard one, actually. That's not your starter pack. That's maybe year one goal.
Are you online, social? Can people find you places?
Oh man, this is painfully awkward. So my handle on Twitter is Jamie Antisocial. There's a long story there. I think we're getting kicked out of the recording booth, but I'm technically on LinkedIn. I have never posted, but if you send me a request, I will accept it. So a little bit of a honeypot game. Feel free to try to social engineer me. I promise I will not engage, but happy to watch.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. That was a really amazing conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I did, for the record, make it halfway through this coffee. So that's a good sign of a good conversation because, yeah, I'm yapping and yapping.
I was speaking slowly when you were sipping to give you that opportunity, so you are welcome. But now you can finish the other half.
Host courtesy. All right, that does wrap up the episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Packet Protector. If you have comments, corrections, topics you'd like us to cover, or anything else to tell us, you can hit us up at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU stands for follow-up. And while you're at Packet Pushers, check out our other podcasts in the network, including Heavy Wireless with Keith Parsons, Network Automation Nerds with Eric Cho, and additional technical podcasts for your IT career development. Thanks for listening.